Let me ask you something. Have you ever witnessed something so unexpected, so out of line, that it made your stomach turn and your blood heat up before you even had time to process what just happened? Maybe it was on the street, or in a park, or during what should have been an ordinary afternoon. Now imagine this: a grown man, a biker, full leather gear, tough attitude, loud engine, deliberately shoving a 10-year-old kid off his skateboard. In broad daylight. In front of people. No reason. No warning. Just raw intimidation. That's not a misunderstanding. That's not a mistake. That's something else entirely. And before anyone could even react, before a single adult stepped forward, a figure emerged from the shadows. Quiet. Controlled. Watching. And what happened next? That's the part of the story you came here for, and trust me, it's worth sticking around for. If you've ever scrolled through a video and thought, all right, just tell me what happened, you're not alone. But this isn't one of those stories where you get all the answers up front. This is one of those rare moments, caught between chaos and calm, that unravels slowly, piece by piece, because how it ends means nothing unless you truly understand how it began. I'm not just telling you a story, I'm walking you into a moment. And by the end of it, you're going to see why what that man did next didn't just shock everyone watching, it changed lives. Including the bikers. Including the kids. And maybe even your own perception of right and wrong. So let me connect with you, not just as a voice behind a screen, but as someone who knows how it feels when you see injustice happen and you don't know whether to intervene or just freeze. Because deep down, you probably relate more than you realize. We've all had moments where we wanted to stand up, to be the one who steps forward, but something held us back. Fear. Doubt. The thought that someone else would handle it. But in this story, no one else was going to handle it except one man. And he didn't shout. He didn't draw attention. He just stepped out of the shadows and made a decision that changed everything. This video isn't about fake drama. It's not clickbait. It's about real people, real reactions, and the thin line between being a bystander and being someone who makes a difference. And if you're still watching right now, that means you care about that line. You want to know what happens when someone finally crosses it. I'm here to tell you, you won't regret staying with this one. I promise, you're going to see it unfold exactly the way you hoped. And not just because the bad guy gets what's coming, but because the way it all plays out is something you couldn't script if you tried. Let's set the scene. It's a warm Saturday afternoon. The kind of day where families head to the park, kids pull out their skateboards and scooters, and parents finally get a chance to take a breath. The city noise is still in the distance, but here, in this open-air public skate park nestled between rows of elm trees and brick buildings, there's a pocket of calm. Laughter. The thud of wheels on concrete. The occasional scrape of a failed trick. And in the middle of it all, a kid named Tyler. Just 10 years old, wearing a faded Captain America t-shirt, helmet strapped tight, and a skateboard that's clearly seen better days. He's not the best skater in the world, but he's out there trying. Pushing himself. Falling, then laughing, then getting back up. The kind of resilience that's rare in adults, let alone kids. And he's not bothering anyone. Not cutting in front of people. Not doing anything wrong. Just being a kid. That's when the biker shows up. Not some teenager on a BMX, not a dad with his kid. I'm talking about a full-grown man on a Harley, riding into a park clearly marked no motor vehicles beyond this point. He's the kind of guy you notice instantly. Tall. Broad. Sunglasses that cover half his face. Leather vest with patches you don't recognize. The kind of presence that demands space. He doesn't park on the side like everyone else. He rides right through the gate. Right onto the concrete where kids are skating. He revs the engine once. Loud. Pointless. Intimidating. And then he locks eyes with Tyler. What happens next feels surreal, like a scene out of a movie where you're yelling at the screen. There's no way this guy's serious. But he is. The biker leans down. Says something low. No one hears it clearly. And then, with one hand, he shoves Tyler hard enough that the kid hits the ground sideways, his skateboard flying across the pavement, helmet smacking the concrete with a crack. Everyone freezes. Parents gasp. A few teenagers step forward, unsure of what to do. But no one moves fast enough. And that biker? He just stands there. Like he owns the place. Like daring someone to say something. And in that moment, for a terrifying few seconds, it looks like he's going to walk away without consequence. But that's when it happens. Out of the corner of everyone's eye, from behind a concrete wall where the shadows stretch just enough to hide a person, a man steps forward. Slowly. Calmly. You can't see his face yet, just his silhouette, tall, lean, deliberate. Not dressed like a cop. Not dressed like a biker. Just an ordinary man. But there's something about the way he walks, the way he carries himself, that shifts the entire energy in the park. Like the air got heavier. Like something is about to change. He doesn't run. He doesn't yell. He just walks straight toward the biker and stops just 10 feet away. And that, right there, that moment of stillness, is where everything begins to unravel. Now, I know you're curious. I know you're sitting there thinking, who is this guy? Is he going to fight the biker? Is he a dad? A stranger? Someone with a background that's about to blow our minds. And I promise you, the answer is so much more than you expect. Because what this man does next isn't just brave. It isn't just smart. It's something that flips the entire situation on its head and leaves everyone around questioning what they would have done if they were in his shoes. This isn't just a story about a bully getting what's coming. This is about how power shifts when someone decides to use it for the right reason. This is about control. About courage. About silence that speaks louder than shouting. And let me be real with you, if you think you've seen videos like this before, where some guy swoops in like a hero, you haven't seen this one. Because what's about to unfold doesn't follow the usual script. There are no predictable punchlines. No cheap shots. Just one man stepping into a moment, owning it, and changing the story entirely. And right when you think it's all over, when justice has been served and the park breathes easy again, something else happens. Something no one expected. Something that makes everyone watching realize that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't random at all. That the man who stepped out of the shadows might have been there for a reason. And that reason? It's what will keep you glued to this screen. So go ahead, lean in. You're exactly where you need to be. You came here for answers, and you're going to get them. Every detail. Every twist. Every truth that led to that one moment. But you have to stay with me. Because the real story hasn't even started yet. And just when you think you know who the real hero is, or what the biker's true motive was, or why Tyler was the one who got targeted in the first place, everything is going to flip again. The man takes one step closer. The biker flinches. And that's when something falls from the man's coat pocket, something that changes everything. What fell from the man's coat wasn't a weapon, not a badge, not even a phone. It was something far more subtle. An old, folded photograph, yellowed at the edges, creased from years of being handled too many times. It fluttered to the concrete like a leaf caught in a gust, landing face up just long enough for the biker, and anyone else close enough, to see it. And in that split second, the biker's tough facade cracked. Not a full collapse, but a flicker, a moment of recognition that passed through his eyes like a shadow. It wasn't just shock, it was something deeper, sharper, as if that photo pierced a part of him he thought was buried. He stepped back, hesitated, and for the first time since he rode into the park, he looked unsure. And yet, the man in the coat didn't pick it up. He didn't even glance down. He just stood there, staring the biker down like he already knew what was about to happen. Like this moment wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. But to understand how things got to this point, we need to rewind. Not just to earlier that day, or even that week, but to the messy, tangled web of choices, missteps, and unfinished business that brought this man, this quiet figure who stepped from the shadows, to that park at precisely the right moment. His name was Marcus Hale, though he hadn't used that name in over a year. People knew him by different names in different towns, but all of them carried the same quiet gravity. He wasn't a cop. Not officially. He wasn't military. At least, not anymore. What Marcus was is harder to pin down, because Marcus didn't leave a trail of paperwork or press releases. He left rumors, whispers, stories you only heard in hushed voices at truck stops or late-night diners, stories about a man who shows up when things go too far and no one else steps in. Some called him a vigilante, others a ghost. But the truth, as always, was more complicated. Just 3 days before the incident in the park, Marcus was 2 towns over in a place called Mason Creek, staying in a rundown motel where the vending machine hadn't worked since 2019 and the front desk clerk only spoke in grunts. He wasn't there on vacation. He never was. He'd come following a name he'd picked up from an old friend in Chicago, someone he trusted, someone who rarely reached out unless it mattered. The name was Vince Marlowe, a former enforcer for a biker gang known more for extortion than motorcycle rallies. Vince had a reputation, not just for violence, but for pushing boundaries the rest of the crew avoided. And word was, Vince had resurfaced. Not to make peace, but to settle a score. One tied to a botched deal, a missing person, and a file that had disappeared off the radar 18 months ago. The kind of file that governments lost sleep over. The kind Marcus had once sworn he'd never go looking for again. But then came the photo. It showed up in his motel room, slipped under the door while he was asleep. No note, no fingerprints, just the image. It was Tyler. Same Captain America shirt. Same skateboard. Same goofy grin. But it was the background that chilled Marcus. The photo had been taken from across the street, like a surveillance shot. Not a proud parent's keepsake. A warning. Or a threat. And written in sharp red ink across the bottom were the words, "Do you remember now?" The problem was, Marcus didn't remember. At least, not the way whoever sent it wanted him to. But the photo stirred something. Not a memory exactly, but a feeling, a gut sense that Tyler wasn't just some random kid. That there was a connection. Maybe through someone Marcus once knew, someone whose name he'd buried alongside too many others. So he packed up and left Mason Creek that morning, barely saying a word, and drove for hours without stopping until he found himself standing at the edge of a skate park on the north side of Hillgrove, watching a boy who didn't know he was being watched. But here's where things start to twist. Because Marcus wasn't the only one watching that day. Across town, at a greasy spoon called Deacon's Grill, 2 men sat in a booth pretending to enjoy cold coffee and pancakes like rubber. They weren't locals. Their accents were flat, forced. Their posture too stiff for casual conversation. They kept glancing at a folder on the table between them, slightly open, revealing snapshots of the park, the biker, and Marcus. One of them had a small black device in his hand, a tracker. The kind you don't buy in stores. The other one muttered something about timing and not blowing the cover too soon. Which means someone was following Marcus. Someone who knew where he'd be, maybe even why. And that raises the question, was the encounter with the biker really just a coincidence? Or was Marcus being baited? And Vince? He hadn't been seen in nearly a year. Some said he went underground. Others claimed he was dead. But one thing was clear, he had reasons to hate Marcus. Deep ones. Years ago, before Marcus disappeared from the official world, he ran an operation that went sideways. Lives were lost. Files went missing. And Vince was the only one who came out the other side still breathing, but barely. Rumor was, Vince believed Marcus left him to die. Whether that was true or not, no one knew. But if Vince was back and if Tyler was being watched, then this whole thing, the biker, the photo, the confrontation, might have been something far more orchestrated than it seemed. And there's another layer. A woman named Elise. She used to work in a crisis recovery unit for a federal agency that no longer exists on paper. She and Marcus shared more than just classified missions. They shared a life, once. Quiet and off-grid, but real. Until one mission went south and Elise vanished. Disappeared without a trace. Marcus searched for her until the trail went cold. And yet, Tyler looked like her. Not exactly. But in the shape of his face, the curve of his smile, there was something eerily familiar. Something that made Marcus wonder. Was Tyler Elise's son? And if so, was he his? See how quickly the lines start to blur? Because now we're not just talking about some guy stepping in to stop a punk biker from bullying a kid. We're talking about old enemies. Buried connections. Maybe even blood ties. And just when you think you're starting to piece it together, another name surfaces. Lance Derringer. A freelance asset tracker who once worked for the same outfit Marcus was recruited into. He was known for flipping loyalties, selling information to the highest bidder. And guess who he was last spotted meeting with in a bar near Mason Creek? Vince Marlowe. Which means someone, somewhere, might have paid Vince to bait Marcus into resurfacing and used Tyler as the hook. And yet, none of this explains why the biker shoved Tyler in the first place. He didn't ask for money, didn't issue a threat. He just acted. Raw aggression. But what if it wasn't aggression? What if it was a signal? A test? Something meant to provoke Marcus, to see if he'd react the way they hoped. Because if you know anything about strategic setups, you know that sometimes the only way to flush out a ghost is to force him to reveal himself. And Marcus, stepping out of those shadows, might have just done exactly what they wanted. But before we can get to what happens next, before we can uncover what Marcus says to the biker, or whether Vince is actually lurking nearby, or who those men in the diner are working for, we need to circle back to that photograph. Because when the wind shifted and it lifted slightly on the pavement, one thing became clear. There was something written on the back, too. A name. One Marcus hadn't seen in years. And when he finally does look down and read it, that's when everything in this story tilts on its axis. And you're going to want to be here when it does. Marcus didn't flinch as the biker finally backed off, mumbling something under his breath before storming toward his Harley, visibly rattled. The park began to breathe again. Kids resumed skating, a mother pulled her toddler a little closer, and a man with a pit bull muttered, "What the hell just happened?" under his breath. But Marcus didn't move. He stared down at the photograph on the pavement, its edges curling slightly in the warm breeze. The writing on the back was now clear, scrawled in jagged black ink. "You still owe me. D." His chest tightened. There weren't many people who signed notes that way. In fact, there was only one. And he hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in over 6 years. Derek Vale. A name that used to mean loyalty, until it didn't. Marcus slid the photo into his coat pocket and turned slowly, scanning the surrounding area. He had that familiar feeling again, not paranoia, not exactly, but something deeper. A sense of being watched. And not by amateurs. By someone trained. He didn't see anyone obvious, but that was part of the problem. If someone wanted him to know he was being followed, they'd make it known. But if they didn't, that meant this went beyond Vince, beyond the biker, beyond Tyler. This was a different level entirely. That night, Marcus headed to a small bar on the edge of town that he remembered from his last time through Hillgrove, a place called the Lockbox. It was the kind of bar where the jukebox was always broken, but the bartender remembered your drink if you tipped well. It was also a place where people talked if you asked the right way. He figured he'd make a few quiet inquiries about Vince, maybe see if anyone had spotted a biker matching that description in the last few days. But the moment he walked in, he knew something was off. The usual bartender, an older guy named Manny, wasn't behind the counter. Instead, a younger woman stood in his place, wiping down the bar with quick, nervous movements. She looked up and gave Marcus a tight smile, but her eyes flicked toward a booth in the far corner as if signaling something she wasn't allowed to say out loud. Marcus followed her gaze. There was a man in the corner, alone, nursing a whiskey he hadn't touched in 10 minutes. His posture was too controlled, his jacket too clean for a place like this. Marcus approached slowly, sat without asking, and said one word. "Derek." The man didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He took a slow sip of his drink and replied with a small, practiced smile. "Been a long time, Hale." The conversation that followed wasn't friendly. Derek was cagey, evasive. He spoke in half-truths and riddles, suggesting that he wasn't alone in orchestrating the events that led Marcus here. Someone else, someone with power, wanted Marcus back in circulation. "People are starting to remember you," Derek said softly. "They remember what you did, what we did. And some of them don't want those memories getting stirred up." Marcus leaned forward. "Why Tyler? Why now?" But Derek only smiled. "Because you're not who you think you are anymore." That line stuck with Marcus long after he left the bar. He returned to the motel that night, but when he opened the door, the entire place had been tossed. Every drawer emptied, the mattress flipped, his duffel bag slashed open. But what hit hardest wasn't what was missing. It was what had been left behind. On the nightstand sat the photo again. But this time, someone had burned out the faces with a cigarette, leaving only Tyler's intact. Next to it was a small piece of metal, an old military dog tag Marcus hadn't seen in years.
His own.
But it had been marked with something new, a red X gouged across the surface. He didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, but because of the realization that he was being outplayed. Someone had access to his room. Someone knew his past. And someone wanted him to know they were always one step ahead. The next day, he went looking for answers in a place he swore he'd never return to, an abandoned facility just outside of Fort Weiler, where he and Derek once ran Black Ops recovery missions for a shadow branch of national intelligence. The place had been shuttered years ago after a classified operation went public and the agency was disbanded. But Marcus had reason to believe it wasn't as abandoned as it looked. He found the back gate rusted but unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with dust and secrets. Faded documents lay scattered on the floor, old equipment covered in cobwebs. But one file was still intact, sealed inside a metal case hidden under a false panel in the floor, his own case file. It detailed missions he barely remembered, decisions he didn't recall making, and, most chilling of all, a psychological assessment suggesting that part of his memory may have been deliberately altered. According to the file, he'd once been part of a covert behavioral modification project. One that involved memory suppression. That meant someone, somewhere, had tampered with his mind. Not to protect him, but to hide something. As he stared at the final page, his eyes narrowed. A name appeared under the section labeled Operational Control, Elise Monroe. She hadn't vanished. She'd been reassigned. Not missing. Not dead. Just buried. And if she was involved in whatever this was, then Tyler wasn't just a random kid. He might be the key to everything Marcus forgot. But then came the twist he didn't see coming. As he stepped outside the facility, phone in hand to call an old contact, a car pulled up slowly along the tree line. Tinted windows. No plates. The driver's window rolled down just enough for Marcus to see the face behind the wheel. It wasn't Vince. It wasn't Derek. It was Elise. She didn't speak. Just stared at him with a look that was equal parts sorrow and warning. And then she drove away.
Fast.
And the thing that made Marcus freeze wasn't the sight of her. It was the passenger he glimpsed just before the window went up. It was Tyler, but here's where it gets strange. Tyler didn't look confused. Or scared. He looked calm. Like he knew exactly where he was going. And now, everything Marcus thought he was chasing might have been a lie from the start. The moment Elise's car vanished beyond the tree line, leaving only a swirling cloud of dust and the sound of tires grinding gravel, Marcus stood motionless, his mind racing through an avalanche of questions that refused to settle. Tyler's calm expression haunted him more than anything, the way the boy looked directly at him, without fear, without surprise, like he was expecting to see Marcus standing there. That moment cracked something inside Marcus, some fragile remnant of control he'd been clinging to since the biker shoved Tyler off his board. And just when he thought he was beginning to understand the game being played, something new pulled him into even deeper waters. Back in the city, hundreds of miles away, a woman named Camille Givens, an old intelligence analyst Marcus hadn't spoken to since his last operation, walked out of a university lecture hall where she taught criminology under an alias. She thought her past was behind her. She'd changed her name, changed her job, even changed her rhythm of life. No more code words, no more burner phones, no more midnight file drops at train stations. But as she walked to her car that evening, something familiar sent a chill crawling up her spine. An envelope was tucked under her windshield wiper, plain, unmarked, deliberately casual, but the weight of it in her hand told a different story. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of a playground, one she immediately recognized because it was the same playground where Marcus had once saved her from an ambush overseas. And scribbled on the bottom in smeared black Sharpie were 3 words: "He's waking up." She hadn't heard that phrase in nearly a decade, but its meaning was clear. It was code. From the old program. From before the shutdown. Camille didn't waste a second. She drove home without turning on her GPS, checking her rearview mirror at every intersection, mentally counting the stoplights and exit ramps just like she was trained to do. When she got to her apartment, she went straight to her safe, pulled out an old encrypted USB drive, and plugged it into a secure offline laptop. Within minutes, her worst fears were confirmed. She had surveillance data from 2 days ago, taken from a long-defunct agency satellite, showing Marcus standing in front of that same abandoned facility outside Fort Weiler. She zoomed in, frame by frame, until she caught something even more shocking: Elise Monroe entering the building before Marcus arrived, wearing a pass that looked suspiciously current. But that made no sense. The facility was supposed to be decommissioned. The agency was supposed to be dissolved. None of this added up unless Camille opened her encrypted messaging app and sent a single burst transmission. Subject: Hail compromised. Project Lazarus active. All protocols void. Need extraction. And then she sat back, heart pounding, staring at her reflection in the black screen.
She thought she'd buried the past.
But someone had just dug it up. Meanwhile, Marcus sat alone in a diner off Route 81, a half-empty coffee cup in front of him and his thoughts spinning like tires in a storm. He kept replaying Tyler's expression in the car, Elise's cold stare, and the way Derek's voice trembled ever so slightly when he mentioned people remembering. He didn't know if he was chasing ghosts or being used as bait, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear: this wasn't about Tyler anymore. Tyler was just the thread. The real web was much bigger. As he scribbled notes in the margin of a discarded newspaper, something struck him. If Elise was still active and Tyler was with her willingly, maybe Tyler wasn't in danger. Maybe Marcus was. Maybe Tyler had been planted near him for a reason: to reawaken those long-buried instincts, to lure him out of hiding. But for what purpose? Revenge? A resurrection of the program? Or something even darker? His train of thought was shattered when a man slid into the booth across from him. No introduction, no warning. He looked familiar, but not in a friendly way. His eyes were sharp, calculating. He reached into his jacket and placed something on the table. A burner phone, already vibrating. The caller ID was blocked. Marcus didn't touch it. The man spoke calmly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not supposed to be asking questions. That's not your job anymore." Marcus didn't answer. He waited. The man leaned closer. "You think Tyler's the target? He's not. He's the fuse. And when he lights, everything you remember, everything you were trained to forget, comes back." The phone stopped vibrating. Without another word, the man stood, walked out, and disappeared into a passing crowd like he was never there. Marcus stared at the phone, knowing that picking it up would mean crossing a line he couldn't uncross. But before he could decide, the waitress arrived with his check. She placed it down, smiled politely, and then paused. "Someone left you this," she said, sliding a napkin onto the table. On it was a single phrase, written in the same sharp handwriting from the photo he found at the skate park. "Trust no one, not even her." Marcus looked out the window, scanning the street for anything familiar, any trace of the man or Elise or even a surveillance drone. Nothing. Just an ordinary evening in a city that had no idea what kind of fire was about to be lit beneath its surface. And in that moment, Marcus realized something that chilled him more than anything else he'd uncovered. He didn't know who Elise was anymore. And worse, he wasn't sure he ever really did. The rain began without warning that night, drumming against the motel roof like 1,000 impatient fingers tapping out a countdown Marcus couldn't ignore. He hadn't touched the burner phone left by the stranger at the diner, but its presence gnawed at him like a splinter under skin. Something about it felt staged, too clean, too intentional. And as he sat in the dark room, lit only by the flicker of a neon vacancy sign outside, he couldn't shake the weight of that napkin message: "Trust no one, not even her." It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was a survival instinct, honed over years of operations where nothing was what it seemed. And now, even his memories were up for debate. The things he once swore were truths: his loyalty to Elise, the finality of the mission that ended their unit, the idea that Tyler was an innocent caught in a storm, were unraveling, and the silence pressing in around him felt more like a trap than peace. He decided to check on someone who might still be real, someone unconnected to the maze of false identities and broken loyalties. Her name was Jenna Cross, a freelance tech analyst who had once saved his life with a GPS hijack during a mission gone wrong. She was one of the few people Marcus had ever truly trusted, mostly because she never asked for more than what she needed to know. They had a system, code messages hidden in weather data, innocuous GPS coordinates disguised as road maintenance alerts. If anyone could help him make sense of the photo, the facility, or even the surveillance drones he now believed were following him, it was her. But when he drove out to her cabin in the mountains, far beyond the range of cell towers and surveillance, the silence hit him harder than he expected. Her car was gone, and the front door had been left open, swaying slightly in the wind like it had been caught mid-escape. Inside, the place was a mess, but not ransacked.
It was too precise for that.
The computers were missing, hard drives wiped clean. Food still sat on the counter, half prepared. Her favorite hoodie, the one with the SpaceX patch on the sleeve, hung on the back of a chair like she'd just stepped away. Marcus moved room to room, calling her name in a whisper that grew heavier with each unanswered echo. And then, in the center of her work desk, he found it, a single playing card, the Queen of Spades, torn in half, with a phrase written in block letters on the back. "Next time it's you."
His heart sank.
He hadn't seen that calling card in over 8 years. Not since the fall of Operation Nightglass, a black bag intel war that never made the news, but buried dozens of assets across Europe. The Queen of Spades had been used by an off-book faction to mark betrayals. If Jenna had been taken or coerced by someone from that network, it meant the situation was spiraling far beyond revenge or reactivation. It was a purge. And Marcus was being hunted, not just as a loose end, but as a threat to something larger, something still active in the shadows. He fled the cabin as the rain intensified, windshield wipers barely keeping up with the storm. But the isolation no longer comforted him. Every pair of headlights behind him sparked unease. Every movement in the tree line screamed of surveillance. The lines between memory and paranoia blurred so quickly that even his thoughts started to feel foreign. He drove for miles without a destination, mind racing, trying to piece together the events from the past few days. Someone was trying to make him remember, but only certain things. And someone else was trying to erase everything. Between the two forces, Marcus felt like a man being dissected in real time, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the person he thought he was. That night, he checked into a new motel under a fake name he hadn't used since 2013. He used cash, covered his tracks, and still, when he opened the room's dresser drawer, there it was waiting for him, the same photograph of Tyler at the park, but this time it had been altered. Someone had drawn a red circle around a figure in the background. A man standing under a tree, face turned slightly toward the camera. Marcus hadn't noticed him before. The figure wasn't anyone he recognized at first glance, but something about the posture, the way the man stood like he belonged there, set off every internal alarm he had. He flipped the photo over. No writing this time. Just a small thumbprint pressed into the lower corner. Human.
Smudged.
Almost mocking. Marcus didn't sleep. He sat against the wall, pistol on the nightstand, staring at the door and trying to keep his thoughts from collapsing in on themselves. What if this wasn't just about him? What if Jenna wasn't the only one taken? What if Elise was working with them, not as a prisoner or rogue agent, but as someone fully invested in whatever this was becoming? The government didn't talk about Project Lazarus anymore because, officially, it never existed. But unofficially, the kinds of neural rewiring and memory suppression they attempted on Marcus weren't just experimental, they were criminal.
It wasn't just about espionage.
It was about control. And maybe Marcus wasn't the only operative built and broken in the process. Then the motel room phone rang. An old landline, the kind nobody used anymore. Marcus stared at it for several seconds before picking it up, heart thudding like a drumbeat in his throat. There was only one sentence spoken in a voice he hadn't heard in years. "If you want the truth, go back to where they took your name." And then the line went dead. Marcus sat in the stillness, the words echoing louder than the dial tone. Go back to where they took your name.
He knew what that meant.
The facility where he first signed on. The place where his old identity was erased and the new one, the ghost named Marcus Hale, was created. That facility had been destroyed years ago in a controlled fire, but maybe the real truth had survived. Or maybe someone was setting a trap, knowing his need for answers would outweigh his instinct for caution. But what chilled him to his core, more than the message or the card or the vanishing of a trusted ally, was a possibility he could no longer ignore. What if he hadn't just forgotten something important? What if someone had made him forget something unforgivable? And now, piece by piece, they were making sure he remembered. Not to help him, but to destroy him from the inside out. The next morning, Marcus drove with a knot in his gut that tightened with every passing mile. The coordinates etched into his memory weren't just numbers anymore. They were a ticking time bomb, one he could feel pulsing behind his ribs. The road to the old facility was long abandoned, overgrown, and half-swallowed by nature, but as his tires crunched over crumbling gravel and broken glass, a cold familiarity settled in. This was where everything had started, or so he believed. The compound, once cloaked in secrecy and locked down with military-grade surveillance, now looked like a skeleton of its former self. Faded security signs, shattered windows, and scorched walls told the story of a fire that had conveniently buried the program's existence. But as Marcus walked past the gates, his boots kicking up ash and soot, he spotted something that made him stop in his tracks. A fresh footprint in the mud. Someone else had been here. Recently. The deeper he moved into the ruins, the more he realized the destruction had been surface level, like makeup hiding a scar. Beneath the charred beams and twisted rebar, steel-reinforced doors had survived the blaze. One of them hung open just enough to slip through, and beyond it was a corridor untouched by fire. The air was thick with mildew, the lights long dead, but Marcus's flashlight cut through the gloom and landed on a familiar hallway. It was the evaluation wing, the place where subjects were monitored after neural protocol implantation. He hadn't walked this hallway in over a decade, yet every detail came back with jarring clarity. The intake chamber, the observation room, the interrogation booth with the one-way mirror, and then a rusted door at the end with the number 47B painted across it in fading red. That was the room where Marcus Hale had been born, where his old identity was burned, and a new one constructed from the ashes. He entered slowly, expecting dust and silence. But what he found was something entirely different. The room had power. A low hum vibrated from a functioning server rack in the corner, still blinking with activity. Wires ran along the floor to a monitor that flickered to life as he stepped forward, and before he could react, a video began to play. It was grainy, time-stamped from over 9 years ago, but unmistakable. On screen was Marcus, strapped to a metal chair, eyes red from whatever they'd injected into him. Across from him sat Elise, not the Elise he remembered, but cold, unreadable, dressed in the black uniform of a handler, not a partner. She was interviewing him, but the dialogue shattered his entire world. Subject shows promising integration with rewritten core memories, she said into the camera. We've successfully installed the fabricated trauma sequence. He now believes the mission failure was a result of betrayal by Unit Bravo. Emotional resonance is stable. Then she turned to him and asked in a soft, rehearsed tone, Marcus, who do you blame for Tyler's death? And he answered without hesitation, voice cracked and hollow, Bravo Unit. They left us behind. But Tyler wasn't dead. Tyler never existed. Marcus stumbled back, ball rising in his throat, heart slamming against his chest like it was trying to warn him of something bigger. The entire identity he'd clung to, the grief, the guilt, the revenge, had been manufactured. He'd been a weapon built on a lie. And Elise hadn't just been complicit. She'd helped mold the narrative. She'd watched him grieve a phantom and fed the illusion for nearly a decade. The realization hit him with such force that he nearly missed the soft chime from the terminal beside the monitor. A message had appeared. Welcome back. Asset 1279. You are now activated. He staggered out of the room, lungs burning with panic, but before he could escape, he heard a voice behind him.
Calm.
Measured. Familiar. You weren't supposed to find that. But I guess you were always too curious for your own good. He turned slowly. It was Jenna,
Alive.
unharmed, and holding a weapon pointed squarely at his chest. She stepped into the flickering light, her expression unreadable. I tried to help you forget, Marcus. We all did. But someone pulled you too close to the edge again. And now you remember, which makes you dangerous. Marcus couldn't breathe. Nothing made sense anymore. The only person he thought he could trust, his lifeline in the chaos, was part of the machine that built him. And she had just revealed the most damning twist of all. You were never supposed to survive Project Lazarus, she whispered. You were just supposed to bury the truth. Then she stepped aside, revealing another figure emerging from the shadows behind her. And it was a face Marcus had seen before. In the photo.
At the park.
Standing behind Tyler. The man he never noticed until now. Marcus stood frozen, his breath trapped somewhere between disbelief and rising fury. The air in the abandoned compound felt thicker now, like the walls themselves were closing in with every word Jenna spoke. The man from the photograph stepped forward, his face more familiar than Marcus wanted to admit. He wasn't just some stranger lurking in the background of a blurry image. He was Dr. Adrian Lang, the head neuroscientist behind Project Lazarus. A ghost from the shadows of Marcus's forgotten past. And the way he looked at Marcus, with a blend of pride and regret, made it clear that nothing had been left to chance. Not Marcus's memories, not his mission, not even the emotional bonds he thought were real. Everything had been calculated, manipulated, and constructed by the very people standing in front of him. Jenna didn't lower the weapon, but her hands trembled slightly now, and her voice cracked just enough to betray a trace of guilt. I didn't want this, she said, eyes searching his face for something. Maybe understanding, maybe forgiveness, but Marcus couldn't give her either. We were supposed to monitor you, not bring you back here. I was assigned to keep you stable, out of trouble. But when you saw that kid at the park, everything began unraveling. You started asking questions, and now you've pulled too many threads. Marcus stepped forward slowly, his voice a low growl, boiling with betrayal. You could have stopped it. You could have told me the truth years ago. Jenna's expression hardened at that, her resolve tightening like a wire. And what would you have done, Marcus? Gone to the media? Destroyed yourself trying to expose something no one would believe? We were trying to protect you from yourself. Dr. Lang finally spoke, calm and composed, like he was delivering a lecture. You were the prototype, Marcus. The first subject to show full neural integration without permanent psychosis. That was the miracle. But we had to implant pain, deep, personal loss, because grief anchors memory. It made you stable. It made you loyal. Marcus felt like he was spiraling through a waking nightmare. Every bond, every motivation he'd held sacred had been fabricated. The pain he lived with wasn't a scar, it was a chain. And now Lang was offering him a way out. A clean exit. We can put you back under, Lang said. You won't remember any of this. You'll wake up tomorrow in a safe house with a new history, a peaceful life. You'll be free of the questions, the lies, and the danger. It was a choice that seemed so simple, so tempting. Erase the nightmare, return to peace. But Marcus knew better. That peace came at the price of truth. It meant letting the people who orchestrated all of this walk away clean, unpunished, free to do it again. He turned to Jenna, desperate now, not for forgiveness, but for answers. Was any of it real? The nights we talked, the way you looked at me when you thought I was sleeping, did you feel anything? Her silence was louder than any confession. And then, softly, she said, that's why I begged them not to send me. Because I did. It shattered him in a way nothing else had. But before he could process that weight, Lang raised a hand, signaling something, and hidden doors slid open behind them. Armed operatives filed in, weapons drawn. The choice was no longer theoretical, it was immediate. Lang stepped forward with a small black case in hand. Inside is a dose. You take it, and everything ends here. You'll walk out with no memory of this conversation, no trauma. Just a new life. Or you can run. But we both know how that ends. Marcus stood at the center of it all, betrayal burning in his chest, truth clawing at his sanity, and the ghost of the person he thought he was whispering to hold on. The weight of the decision crushed down on him, but there was no time left to delay it. Jenna's eyes met his one last time, full of sorrow and conflict. He had to decide, erase everything and live in blissful ignorance, or fight for the truth, knowing it would cost him everything. And as his hand inched toward the case, one of the operatives raised a communicator to his mouth and said 5 chilling words that froze Marcus's blood. He's already made the upload. Upload of what? Marcus turned sharply, dread blooming in his chest as every person in the room stiffened. Whatever had just been triggered wasn't part of their plan. And someone, maybe not even Marcus himself, had just rewritten the endgame. In that instant, the air in the compound shifted like a storm front rolling through. The operatives who had once stood ready and certain now exchanged uneasy glances, their formations subtly unraveling. Dr. Lang's hand twitched at his side, and for the first time, a crack appeared in his polished composure. Marcus didn't need to be told. He could see it in their eyes. Something had slipped out of their control, and whatever upload the operative had just mentioned, it had set off more than alarms. It had lit a fuse. Lang snapped toward Jenna, his voice suddenly sharp and panicked. You said he never accessed the vault. You said the neural firewall held. Jenna shook her head slowly, but there was something new in her expression. Resignation. You told me to keep him stable, not compliant. The words hung heavy between them, more confession than defense. And in that moment, Marcus understood. Jenna had known all along that this would spiral out of control. Maybe she'd even hoped it would. Because she wasn't just a handler or a pawn in Lang's little experiment. She was something else now. A wild card. A saboteur. Or maybe just a woman trying to undo the damage she helped create. The truth was unraveling faster than Marcus could contain it. The upload wasn't some backup file or a security leak. It was a dead man's switch. Something buried deep inside his neural framework, lying dormant for years until the right combination of memories and trauma unlocked it. They hadn't just built him to forget. They'd built him to expose them if he ever remembered. And now it was too late to stop. Somewhere, across multiple encrypted servers and hidden databases, classified logs, surveillance tapes, and internal memos were being distributed to unknown recipients. Marcus had become the very weapon they were afraid of. Not the violent kind, but the kind that could tell the truth. Lang lunged for the communicator, barking orders to shut down external connections, but Jenna had already beaten him to it. She tossed a flash drive at Marcus, her voice low and urgent. This is the original Lazarus logbook. Every subject, every experiment, names, faces, locations. You weren't the only one, Marcus. There are hundreds. Marcus felt the bottom fall out of his world again. Hundreds. Not just test subjects, but people like him. People who'd been turned into living ghost programs. Memories rewritten, lives erased, some used for missions, others discarded like broken tools. And many of them were still out there, unaware of who they really were. Some, perhaps, still being controlled. This wasn't just about Project Lazarus anymore, it was about every covert operation buried under decades of black ops secrecy. Every accidental death. Every missing person. Every operative who'd vanished without a trace. It all pointed back to the same cold, calculating machine. Lang stepped toward Marcus with desperate intensity now, voice stripped of arrogance. You don't understand what you're doing. If that data spreads, you're not just bringing down a program. You're burning down every intelligence network in this country. You'll destroy lives, families, people who had nothing to do with this. There are consequences beyond your imagination. But Marcus didn't flinch. The consequences already exist. You just hid them. A loud blast shook the compound, dust raining from above. Lights flickered as emergency sirens roared to life. Someone had breached the perimeter. A second force, maybe government cleanup, maybe one of the other factions Marcus had unknowingly tangled with. The time for questions had passed. The purge had begun. Everyone in that room was now a target, including him. That's when the real betrayal struck. Jenna took a step back, not toward Marcus, but toward Lang. Her eyes had softened again, but her gun was no longer aimed at anyone. It was holstered. Marcus stared, unable to speak at first. The flash drive still clutched in his hand felt heavier now. She had never switched sides. Or maybe she'd never left his. "I'm sorry," she whispered, as Lang gripped her arm and pulled her behind him. "I had to make a choice. I thought if I stayed close to him, I could protect you. But I don't control what happens next." Marcus's chest tightened with something far worse than rage. Clarity. He'd spent the last 24 hours running from shadows, decoding lies, chasing ghosts, and the one person who kept him grounded had been walking the line between betrayal and salvation the entire time. Now he didn't know which side she would fall on. Maybe she didn't either. Overhead, more explosions rocked the foundation. Gunfire echoed through distant corridors. Whoever was coming wasn't here to arrest anyone. They were here to wipe the slate clean. And Marcus Hale was at the center of the biggest secret war the public never saw. He tucked the drive into his jacket and ran, not away from the danger, but straight into it. Because if this was how it ended, he'd make sure the world knew how it began. The cold night air hit Marcus like a hammer as he burst through the broken emergency exit, the sirens inside the compound still wailing behind him like a chorus of the dead. Concrete dust clung to his jacket, and the flash drive pressed against his chest with the weight of everything he had uncovered. The perimeter was on fire, literally. Flames licked at the fencing, shadows moved like ghosts between smoke clouds, and scattered bodies of security operatives hinted at just how far this operation had unraveled. But Marcus wasn't running anymore. He wasn't escaping, he was chasing something. The truth. The one piece that still didn't fit, the final thread still tangled in a web of lies. And he knew exactly where to find it. He followed the trail through the ruined remains of the research compound, retracing the steps he'd once walked in a fog of manipulated memories. Deeper and deeper into the facility's underbelly, past rows of cryogenic chambers labeled with nothing but numbers. Not all were empty. Some still held people unmoving, preserved, waiting. Faces pressed against fogged glass. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All experiments. All forgotten. All left behind like broken tools when the project went rogue. And as he moved past them, the sickness in his gut twisted harder. He wasn't just uncovering a conspiracy, he was staring at the evidence of a silent genocide. At the heart of the lab, sealed behind biometric locks now overridden by chaos, he found Lang waiting. The doctor was alone, standing beneath flickering fluorescent lights, fingers stained with blood. His own or someone else's, it didn't matter anymore. His white coat was torn, his eyes sunken with exhaustion, and something else, resolve. There was no smirk this time, no smug arrogance. Just a man at the end of his rope. Marcus stepped into the room slowly, pulse thundering in his ears, the flash drive still secure. "It's over," he said, not as a threat, but as a truth. "I've got everything. Every file. Every face. You can't stop it." Lang didn't flinch. "No," he said, "but I can finish it." From behind him, he pulled a tablet and tapped a sequence. Alarms blared again, louder this time. A countdown appeared on the monitors above, a data purge, set to erase every system in under 3 minutes. "If I can't control it," Lang whispered, "no one will." Marcus lunged forward, but Lang stepped back fast, drawing a concealed weapon. "You think you're the only one we built contingency plans for?" he shouted. "You think this is about you? Lazarus wasn't just a project, it was the foundation. We've rewritten politicians, diplomats, generals. There are agents out there right now who don't even know they're compromised. This doesn't end with you, Marcus. It never did." Marcus stopped cold. That was it. The final puzzle piece snapping into place. Lazarus wasn't just erasing and rebuilding soldiers, it was rewriting history in real time. False identities, planted agents, manipulated leadership. The conspiracy was so vast it could topple governments, collapse nations. And this room, this dying compound, was its rotten heart. "I'm not here to fight you," Marcus said, breathing hard now. I'm here to end you. He raised the flash drive, and to Lang's confusion, snapped it in half. Shards fell to the ground. But Lang didn't smile. He frowned. Why? He demanded. That was everything. Marcus reached into his coat again and pulled out the real drive. Because that one was a decoy. The real upload was completed hours ago. It's already out there. Every news outlet, every whistleblower site, every independent journalist in the country. You killed the past, Lang. I just gave it back to the people. Lang's face crumbled, and for a brief second, Marcus saw the terrified man beneath the monster. He lunged for the tablet, but Marcus was already faster. He drove into Lang with the full weight of his fury, sending them both crashing into a metal console. The gun clattered across the floor, useless now. They fought in silence except for the lab's cracking walls and the screech of collapsing systems. Marcus didn't want revenge. He wanted resolution. But as his fist connected again and again with Lang's face, all he felt was emptiness. And then, just before Lang lost consciousness, he laughed. You still don't get it, he coughed, blood leaking from his mouth. There's one more subject. One more file you never saw. Look deeper, Marcus. Look at your own birth record. You weren't just made for this. You were made from this. Marcus froze. His hands trembled. Somewhere behind the panic and adrenaline, his mind raced through the possibilities. It wasn't just that he had been programmed. It was who he was before that. Who his parents were. Who had disappeared in the early days of Project Lazarus. Lang had said hundreds of subjects had been lost during early trials. What if he wasn't the first success, but the last remnant of an earlier failure? What if everything he thought was recovered memory was actually inherited trauma? Lang passed out, slumped on the ground, still grinning through the blood. Outside, helicopters roared above. Federal teams, drawn by the data leak, had finally descended. The compound was falling, the smoke rising into the sky like a funeral pyre. As agents stormed in and secured the area, Marcus didn't move. He just stood there in the collapsing ruin, holding the final unbroken piece of the truth, a photograph that had fallen from Lang's pocket. A boy, barely 5 years old. And standing beside him, smiling down, was Jenna. But she looked younger. She wasn't just his handler. She was his sister. And with that final twist, the whole truth came crashing down. It took weeks before Marcus could even breathe without feeling like something was chasing him. Some memory, some ghost, some question that refused to die. The compound was gone, buried in federal lockdown and miles of redacted reports. The files he had leaked triggered a nationwide storm, the kind that dominated every trending search on YouTube, every nightly broadcast, every conspiracy podcast that once lived in the shadows. Project Lazarus became a household name almost overnight. Whistleblowers came forward. Journalists traced the money. Congressional hearings lit up prime time. But even as the truth unraveled in front of the world, Marcus remained invisible. Not because he had something to hide, but because he finally understood that his part in the story was never meant to be the headline. He wasn't the hero. He wasn't even the victim. He was the bridge, the thread that connected every broken piece into a whole the world could finally see. He settled far from the noise, in a small cabin tucked into the edge of Oregon's forest line, the kind of place where no cell tower reached, and the only sound at night came from the wind scraping across the trees. For the first time in years, he slept through the night without jolting awake. No encrypted alerts. No hidden cameras. No one watching from the shadows. But peace, as he was learning, wasn't just silence. It was forgiveness, and that was harder to find, especially when it came to Jenna. He had tried reaching her after the leak, but every number went dead. Every trail vanished like mist. If she had survived the fall of the compound, she'd gone deep, possibly deeper than even he could reach. But that photograph still burned in his pocket, creased at the corners, soft from being unfolded and refolded again and again. Jenna, smiling at a boy who looked just like him. She hadn't lied to him entirely. She'd protected him in ways he never saw, guiding him like a ghost through the maze of his past. And yet, Her silence screamed louder than any truth she might have spoken. The government had buried much of what Marcus exposed under the blanket of national security. A few scapegoats went to trial. A few headlines got their closure. But the deeper roots, the programs hidden under shell corporations, the memory suppression research, the experimental genetic labs, were quietly absorbed into other black-budget projects. The system never really crumbled. It just changed shape. And that's what haunted Marcus most. That maybe, in giving the world a glimpse of the truth, he had only scratched the surface of a darkness that still ran far deeper than anyone wanted to admit. The Lazarus program might have died, but its creators, its backers, its architects, they were still out there, waiting, watching, preparing for the next version of control. Sometimes, when the wind was sharp enough and the sky dark enough, Marcus thought he heard footsteps outside his cabin, branches cracking, twigs snapping, the faint hum of a drone in the distance. Sometimes, he'd reach for the weapon still stashed by his bed, heart racing, waiting for a shadow to move through the trees. But nothing ever came. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was memory. Or maybe, just maybe, Lazarus wasn't quite done with him. On one of those nights, a letter arrived. No return address, just a wax seal pressed into the back. Inside was a single sentence written in handwriting he hadn't seen since he was a child. You were never supposed to find out. Tucked beneath it was a photograph, newer this time, of a child, maybe 7 years old, standing outside what looked like a boarding school in the Midwest. The child had his eyes, his smile, and something else. Something Marcus couldn't explain. There were no details, no names, no contact, just the quiet implication that the next chapter had already begun. And so Marcus sat by the fire that night, staring into the flames, letting it all burn, the lies, the betrayals, the parts of himself he would never recover. He didn't know if he would ever see Jenna again. He didn't know if the boy in the photograph was really who he feared he might be. But he knew one thing for certain. The story wasn't over. And maybe it never would be.